field effects, because that's what all the evidence is showing is at play. In other words, the field effects from the hurricane. What John Hudson was doing is to do with field effects, generating electric and magnetic fields and mixing them together in particular ways to generate certain effects. So, going back to this directed energy weapon, a lot of people think in the traditional sense of a laser being a focused beam of energy, or a microwave, this thing that you mentioned, which is the active denial system that's been used at the prison. Right. That's a microwave beam of some kind, or so I understand, and it's quite a narrow focused beam where its energy is acting in one place. What we're talking about here is it's still directed energy, but it's actually the way that it's being manipulated is rather unconventional. It's actually not. We're probably looking at a mixture of directed energy things being put into a kind of an area. They're being directed into an area around the World Trade Center and potentially at the other sites where things happened as well, at the Pentagon, Shanksville. So.
I would like to say the directed part is that it's directed to act on a particular area. Like, why was it just those buildings and not across the street? That's very directional there. But there's an analogy that a student of mine actually came up with when I was trying to describe this to him. He said, I design audio systems. You have to be careful in a particular room where you put the speakers, how you put the speakers, because you could have dead spots where the audio cancels and there's no sound there. Right. And other areas where the bass interferes and you get horrendous sounds. That's what we're talking about. That's a field effect and interference within that field. You don't see it, but weird things happen in those spots.
Right. So we're talking less of a sort of mind's eye impression of a laser gun that's fired a straight trajectory beam along a path, and more of a phenomenon being sponsored in a specific area.
Yes.
Right. I'm just trying to get a handle on it, Dr. Judy, because
right.
As I said, as a total layman, it's mind-boggling to me.
And you don't see it. But there's different, of course, if there's different things interfering, you get more interference here than over there. It's not in exact, pieces in the right place, which I think partly is why the effect on the cars went, way down here and way over there, half a mile away.
What we were trying to draw, we were talking about this, I think, yesterday or the day before, and I tried to draw an analogy in that you imagine, for example, you've got a still pond, and you have a little toy boat in the middle of the pond, and then you get 4 people to hurl down rocks in the corners of that pond. Right. And then the ripples from those rocks going into the pond at the 4 corners, say it's a square pond or nearly square. It doesn't have to be square actually, but you get the idea. And the ripples are then spread out from where those rocks have been hurled in. And the interference effects will be seen where the boat is, and the boat will, obviously go up and down, and, if the energy is strong enough, it may even capsize and sink or break apart. But the energy that was put into the pond wasn't directed at the boat, it was directed downwards into the water. So in other words, you've got directed energy. I know I'm using a kinetic energy analogy, but you can see that the energy change which occurs in the boat is not in the same direction as the rocks were hurled in.
Yeah.
And it looks like this is the way this sort of system is working somehow. In other words, there's this whole branch of physics which was essentially shut down early in the 20th century, and it's called ether physics. And I think myself that this is to do with the manipulation of the ether, which is the kind of the medium in which everything else sits, including the atoms and nuclei and all this that make up all matter. Because if you actually look at what happened to the World Trade Center towers, they basically didn't burn down, they didn't vaporize, they didn't explode. They actually turned to dust, and there was an energy change there, but that energy change didn't involve an appreciable amount of heat, so it was a completely different type of effect on the matter, which seemed to be some type of nuclear process, which was essentially some type of it was triggered by these field effects basically, and this field interference. It seems to be that somebody knows how to make matter fall apart, and the implications of this are of course enormous. I mean, it basically makes all the current weapons technology in the white world completely obsolete, because if you can make two buildings, the fourth tallest buildings in the world, just basically dissolve and fall apart in a period of an hour, that seems to the priming process.
Yeah, an hour or two. Yeah, an hour and a half or so.
The final event took place in 8 and 10 seconds, but that's actually one thing we probably haven't described much in these talks, Judy, about, if you want to talk about that dissolving process, because I might have confused people there as to why I use that word.
Yeah, it's a lot of different words that get used, and words, another thing I don't know if we've covered yet about using words for known technology for an unknown mechanism. Yeah.
There's a lack of vocabulary to describe some of these phenomena, isn't there?
Right, and in my new book, Where Did the Towers Go? I've got a glossary with these terms in it and where to find more information in the book. These generic terms that I use sort of as placeholders for these phenomena. But there's also in my book, I cover familiar everyday things, just about everyday things that we're all familiar with that illustrate this phenomena, this type of physics that we are just directed away from seeing. One example is straw through trees. We're told it's because the straw is flying fast.
Right.
No. It's like the Hutchison effect. When you get this weird field effect from a tornado or a hurricane, you get pieces of stuff going through trees like 2x4s.
Yeah. I've seen quite a few shots of that sort of thing. It's surprisingly more common than you'd imagine. You'd think at the best of times it would be an occasional fluke, but it actually happens routinely from what I believe it was one of your websites, Dr. Judy, that I saw.
Yeah, the guy has this nice collection of them, this Russian guy. But you also get levitation. I think people are familiar with that. A car sitting on top of a tree or a telephone pole.
Yeah. There's some of the most incredulous shots, aren't there, when you look at them?
And my favorite one, this is kind of like the punchline. My critics say, well, you don't have enough energy to do whatever. Well, this is free energy technology, and you're telling me it can't produce enough energy?
Yeah.
It doesn't make sense. But, okay, where does the energy come from?
Yeah, the buildings are gone, haven't they? That's what we always say. They say, well, you can't have enough energy to do that. People have said, the physicists try and argue, well, it's taking a certain amount of energy to make those buildings, they say blow up, but, Dr. Judy Wright says disappear. So that energy had to come from somewhere. We know it had to come from somewhere because the building is no longer there. It's as simple as that. You can't, we've both been to New York and we have actually checked, and we do know that the towers are not actually there anymore. We've been there. We went there in 2008, so that's not up for debate. So and this energy question is sort of not as relevant as people want to make it out to be. That's
it can be more because this is free energy technology. So why are you assuming that it's using energy instead of producing energy?
Yeah,
it's another issue. But here's a more, I guess, fundamental thing. Where does gravity come from? Where does that energy come from?
Well, it's always been one of the great debates of modern science, hasn't it? Is
that
it's still an intangible quantity. All it can do is measure its effects rather than actually identify what it is. Is that correct? Okay,
I've got another challenge for you. I don't know if Andrew's heard this one before. Maybe he has. That when I was a little tyke, our family drove through Topeka, Kansas, the morning of the 9th of June, 1966. The night before, there was this horrendous tornado that went through and tore out half the town. I don't know exactly how much, but it was a significant. It was one of the biggest disasters, tornadoes in U.S. history. Mm-hmm. I remember seeing an apartment house sliced in two. You could see a bed was made in there. You could see some books on the dresser and some other. It was just sliced. And it reminded me of, like, the World Trade Center, Building 4, you could look at and see what was on the desk. Looked like an X-Acto knife, sliced it off. And all this humongous damage from this tornado, are people expected to get out a calculator and see if a tornado could have done that?
Yeah, of course.
But more than that, where did that energy come from?
This is the great debate, I think, isn't it? It's that on one hand they're claiming that the energy isn't there for free energy, it just doesn't exist, and on the other hand they're trying to explain
where the tornado you have all this destruction that just came out of nowhere for a tornado.
Yeah, I mean, it isn't just wind, is it?
Nope. And they can just appear suddenly.
The inference from all this, I suppose, is that they clearly, it suggests that they've achieved the ability to harness this power. And that leads me quite nicely on to a very expansive question by one of our regular listeners, a guy called Vin. He wants me to ask, what do our guests feel could be useful solutions to what ails the world? Which I'm interpreting to mean, if they can harness this for the evil means that they're using it for, is free energy the answer to what ails the world?
I believe so, but it changes everything. And he who controls the energy controls the people, and he who controls the people doesn't want to stop doing that.
Awesome. And free energy is by definition free, so there's no profit to be had in it anyway.
Yeah, I mean the way I look at this is it's an energy issue, and that's, as we were talking before we came on, I think before Judy joined us on Skype, was basically, people say to us, oh, well, we know that 9/11 we know that the official story is false, so we just have to say that it's false, tell people it's false, and the details don't really matter. I don't really care. This is other people speaking, not me. I don't really care whether it was bombs that did it, planes with pods, planes without pods, thermite, nukes.
Mini nukes.
I don't care. Mini nukes, bubble gum. I don't care what did it. We
know Bush did it.
Yeah, we know that Bush was involved, and we need to put up an international war crimes tribunal and all that stuff. But the point is here that we're talking energy, and this, to me, explains. I used to think it was just commercial interests which were preventing free energy technologies from coming into our homes and our lives. I purely thought it was commercial interests. Having, come to the understanding that Dr. Judy showed me and us and the world, I now realise that there's another dimension to this. Yes, the commercial interest thing is there, and always will be, because of oil and gas and fossil fuels and all that stuff, but there is another, probably bigger problem, and it's that there is some group which is not too far away from us. I don't know where they are exactly, but they're certainly paying a close attention to what's going on in our lives. They've got this technology, they've got the energy technology which can liberate free energy from the ether, if I can use that word. Other people may use a different word. And they've already weaponized it. So that group is calling all of the shots. And unless and until we recognize that group exists, then we ain't even going to look to see who it is. But I think President Eisenhower in 1961, he gave us a clue, because he basically said, beware of the military-industrial complex, and what that can do to our culture and our society, and that's essentially what he said in his 1961 speech, which if people haven't heard this speech, I think it's about 15 minutes long, it is absolutely vital and essential viewing, because it explains a good proportion of what has been going on in the events around 9/11, and probably the groups that are responsible for it, or if they're not responsible for it, then those groups know who it is, and that really takes me into another area which I'd like to discuss or make sure we get covered, and that's the whole idea of doing the 9/11 investigation. And what I mean by that is, I was sucked into this truth movement which said, we need a new investigation into 9/11, so let's all get together in a group, and let's say we'll go and write to our MPs and we'll say, we need a new investigation into 9/11. Let's get one now, sorted. We need it. And I was caught up with that to a degree, not a huge degree. And then again, I came across what Dr. Judy was doing. It's actually not. We're probably looking at a mixture of directed energy things being put into a kind of an area. They're being directed into an area around the World Trade Center and potentially at the other sites where things happened as well, at the Pentagon, Shanksville. So.
I would like to say the directed part is that it's directed to act on a particular area. Like, why was it just those buildings and not across the street? That's very directional there. But there's an analogy.
Beam of some kind, or so I understand, and it's quite a narrow focused beam where its energy is acting in one place. What we're talking about here is it's still directed energy, but it's actually the way that it's being manipulated is rather unconventional. So, going back to this directed energy weapon, a lot of people think in the traditional sense of a laser being a focused beam of energy, or a microwave, this thing that you mentioned, which is the active denial system that's been used at the prison. Right. That's a microwave field effects, because that's what all the evidence is showing is at play. In other words, the field effects from the hurricane. What John Hudson was doing is to do with field effects, generating electric and magnetic fields and mixing them together in particular ways to generate certain effects.